Hi, friends. Today we have another Fude Beauty video featuring the Grand Bisyodo brush series. A huge thank you to Fude Beauty and Bisyodo for being so generous in sending this set. I'd expressed before how reviewing new products requires a bit of a budget. A large one. And in regards to these brushes specifically, we'll get into the details of just the high caliber craftsmanship involved in creating these. These are expensive. I consider these an investment, and for Fude Beauty and Bisyodo to send me these complimentary just to share them on my channel, especially if you had your eye on them, maybe you saw them on the website and you're like, ooh, what are those? We'll get into the details, each individual brush. I'll leave the prices down below because I'm afraid if I say them on this video, you guys will probably faint. And with those details, I'll have my affiliated links. Your consideration is always appreciated. Again, this is not to make you buy these brushes. Think of it as a brush parlor moment. We're window shopping, we're looking around, we're browsing. Maybe we'll buy something, maybe we won't. Both outcomes are just fine. And if it's your first time here, hi, I'm Alicia, an online coach who also teaches virtual classes specializing in flexibility, bodyweight training, and helping those obtain sustainable nutrition and movement habits. But I also love my Japanese made brushes. And as I had mentioned at the top of the video, we are looking at the Bisyodo Grand Series. Very special release for this brand as it is their first set to be made with gray squirrel. It is a first for Bisyodo and very exciting because not only do we have an entire brush set made with exclusively high grade premium gray squirrel, but we have premium ebony wood and 24 karat plated gold ferrules. That's why I said I'm not going to mention the price. Just from those details alone, I think you can assume that these come with a high price tag. But I'm happy to present this brush set now because maybe this will be on your radar for a gift, for a holiday, a present to yourself, or someone you love. And what better opportunity to decide if this set is for you than to dive into these brushes individually, speak about them, see them in action. As you know, I love to speak about Fude on my channel, and it is such an honor again to receive this gift. I don't have to repeat myself, but I will anyway because this is always worth mentioning. Fude is brushed in Japan, and Japanese made brushes are just held at a much higher tier than others. And you ask yourself, why is that? Well, all brushes are handmade and the bristles are hand bundled. So you have an artisan who bundles the hairs by hand, picks them, arranges them in a way that will determine the brush's shape and function. And not to mention that depending on the bristle type will determine the approach of the artisan. It could get a little complicated, right? If they're doing a mixture of bristles or the same bristle or what have you, different types of brushes. And then you have the craftsmanship involved in making the wooden handles. And these handles in particular are made of an ebony wood, and each handle is unique. You see how the wood is exposed, but just take a look at this beautiful gradient. So on the front here is more of that black brown, but as it turns, you see it gets more into that burnt brown orange hue, completely and uniquely beautiful. So no handle will look exactly the same, and that just speaks again volumes about these brushes and the set. And Bisyodo is a household name in Japan. They are well known for their brushes, for their craftsmanship. I have a Bisyodo video on my channel if you want to check that out, where I went over a few brushes from across the brand. But the Grand Series, my goodness, I think appropriately named. It just speaks about the prestige of these brushes. Again, everything from the gray squirrel to the wooden handles. So why don't we get into the first brush, shall we? Presenting the GF01. This is the face round flat brush, and it is made all with gray squirrel. I think you can probably tell this is excellent for all over powdering, whether with loose or with pressed powder. And in the demo here, I went in with the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish Powder in tan all over the face, and I just can't tell you how this brush floated over my skin, has like an airlight feel about it, pleasantly places the powder on my skin without disrupting my foundation, without feeling rough, without feeling scratchy. But shall I mention here at this moment that the downside about gray squirrel, I know there is a downside to this exquisite hair, that these brushes are recommended to be only used with powder products and not cream or liquid. Gray squirrel is incredibly delicate and not to be exposed to those types of mediums. Suggested that you only use it with powder products, and if you are to set your foundation, I would recommend that you wait a bit until your foundation sets completely, because keep in mind, when powdering down with this type of a brush, the bristles will pick up any residue from the foundation and it could ruin the bristles. If that happens, please make sure you have a microfiber towel on standby or even a tissue to gently wipe the bristles after you had applied them on your skin to get any excess foundation off the brush. What I did today is, after I applied my NARS Light Reflecting Foundation, I actually taught first and did a few things, and before I went on here to film the B-roll, I then applied the powder on top, and that was the best approach for me because the foundation set a little bit, and when I applied the Charlotte Tilbury powder, the brush just glided over my skin. It didn't pick up any excess foundation. I still had gently wiped it on a towel just in case, but I think that will be, again, the best approach if you are using a liquid or cream foundation. Maybe you're using a powder foundation, maybe something soft matte, who knows, but wanted to throw that in there. I also used the GF01 to apply an oldie but a goodie, the Becca Cosmetics bronzer in Ipanema Sun, an old favorite of mine, and I thought this brush just beautifully applied the bronzer. Because it is flat and round, you see the slight taper here. This edge fits well into the hollows and just pours the powder perfectly into the hollows, hugs the regions of my face that you could have bronzer on, but it won't look too blown out. Again, I like for my bronzer to have just like that enveloped effect on my complexion, and I'll go on and on and on, but this gray squirrel is so freaking soft. It's unbelievable. And I will mention too, if you're not used to this type of bristle, it could feel like, am I even applying makeup on? Like, is it on me? And I say that because you have to align the bristle with the appropriate makeup product. If you were to use this brush with, like, let's say a baked formula or gel to powder formula, I don't think you'll get the best pickup. I would use a goat brush for that product. I wouldn't necessarily use gray squirrel with it, but with powder products, true powder products, that will be your most successful type of makeup to use with these types of brushes and get the best product pickup and product laydown. And of course, once the product is on your skin, the brush just beautifully blurs the edges and everything looks soft focus, skin-like, flawless. I've run out of adjectives to describe the finish that these brushes leave behind. And again, the powder, whether loose or pressed, the bronzer, I could have even applied blush with the GF01, I think a little big. Maybe if you wanted to apply, like my OG, Paradise Venus, on the cheeks, into the hollows, around the brows, maybe I could use that brush with that product. But that is a great segue to the GP01. This is the powder brush, and again, all made with gray squirrel. Compared to the F01, this is all round. This is round and flat. When I spoke about my Holy Grail makeup brushes, I had mentioned that I love a round brush. To apply powder products in this circular fashion, it's just beyond satisfying to me. I don't know why. Same task that I covered with the GF01. pressed powder, loose powder, bronzer, blush. I did, as an experiment, use another oldie, the Makeup Forever Pure Bronze Fusion, I believe in 35 and one of those numbers. This is a gel to powder formula, one of those baked pans that difficult to pick up, and I purposely showed this because, again, as I mentioned before, gray squirrel is a very soft bristle, not appropriate for these types of powders, and you can see I had to go in a few times to actually get the bronzer on my skin. And I wanted to highlight that because if you bought this brush and you have a baked powder, bronzer, blush, whatever, you use it and you're like, oh my gosh, I wasted my money, this brush doesn't work. No, not necessarily. I would grab a pure powder bronzer because I just think it's a better pickup and lay down with the gray squirrel. So I went back to the Becca Cosmetics, applied that with the GP01, and flawlessly again apply this into the hollows, and the splay is just beautiful. So what I like to do, especially with a round brush of this size, is place the bronzer on one portion of the brush and then nudge that into the hollows, and once the majority of the product has been placed, I'll take the brush on its top and whip the bronzer around the top edges, the low edges, maybe get a little bit here on the cheeks. What I especially love the P01 for is blush application. Here I applied the Suqqu Pure Color Blush in 132 from their most recent autumn winter collection, and the way the P01 placed the blush on my cheeks, whipped like in fashion, soft, barely there, perfect dose amount of color. I couldn't ask for a better blush experience. You could also use the GP01 for finishing when all has been applied. Just whip this brush around, and again, the glide, the float, the feel, it's so airlight. Now the GC01, this is their cheek brush and it is smaller, flat round. You have a slight taper here. And for this brush, you could probably suspect great for under eye powdering. I applied the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish pressed powder in medium under the eyes. Great for precision work also around the nostrils, maybe down the nose, between the brows. If you want to get in a little closer here, because the GF01 pretty big, and I think for larger regions on the first go for your loose or pressed powder applications, but this is great, the C01 for under eyes. And I would even say if you wanted something smaller than the GP01, the GP01 round, this is going to give you a little more precision work. So if you wanted more a concentrated dose of maybe contour instead of bronzer, then I would suggest the C01. And then I went in with the Suqqu Blush Palette 102 to apply not only blush, but highlighter. And I love me a round flat brush. I prefer round brushes because, again, I just love the swirl and twirl approach when applying blush. But having a smaller brush that's flat on both sides, I think perhaps maybe more intuitive to use for a beginner, because since the brush head is not too small but not too large, it fits well on the apples of the cheeks, and you can just pounce your cheek color here in a circular fashion without actually turning the brush in this way. You can pounce it here on the cheeks, maybe bring it a little higher on the cheekbones. You could even whip some bronzer into the hollows if you wanted a more concentrated dose of bronzer, but because again, squirrel hair won't pick up as much as goat hair, so the application is just lighter and a little more air whipped. And I've been preferring that approach with my cheek products. I remember when I looked at older makeup photos, I went heavy with the bronzer and the blush, and that's a look for sure. Not to say you can't do that ever, but I have been preferring just a lighter dose of cheek products. And again, when you're layering several, I just think having less product and controlling the dose just makes for a more beautiful and smoother gradient. And even though it's flat on both sides, you can still swirl and twirl, again, for finishing, for cheek product application, as I had mentioned for under eyes. But if you wanted a tapered brush, the HC01 highlight cheek brush, and compared to the Cheek 01 brush, this is round with a more prominent taper, whereas the C01 is flat on both sides with the taper at the top, so it comes just to that slight arrowhead. But what the HC can do beautifully, because of its more prominent taper, is to get really nice powdering here under the eyes, down the bridge of the nose. I love this type of brush for finishing because the point is just so flexible and has beautiful fluidity on the skin, where not only, as I mentioned, you can use this for finishing, but great for precise bronzer placement, right? You can take the bronzer right here at the edge, and I can quickly demonstrate this again with my Becca bronzer. So it's not going to have the same enveloped wide dose of color like the F01, but if you want more of a heavier dose of bronzer here, higher on the hollows of the cheek, so it has more of a pronounced sculpt, then you can use this brush. And you might be wondering, well, you're applying more makeup, it'll look more heavy. No. With Gray Squirrel, the control is in your hand. You can apply as much powder as you want, and you might think it will layer on itself and look heavy, powdery, textury. Not at all. This bristle picks up the perfect amount, blends it out effortlessly, and leaves behind a flawless finish as if you barely applied any makeup. And why I recommend Gray Squirrel for beginners, and that you're like, wow, an expensive brush for someone who rarely wears makeup. Listen, if they're just getting into it and they're afraid of cheek products because maybe in the past when they had applied them, they looked like it was it's a little too much. This will allow you to make mistakes. If you felt like you've made a mistake, the Gray Squirrel will save you. It's foolproof. In addition to bronzer, of course, without a doubt, blush here, as I did with, I believe, the Suqqu 132 blush palette. I applied the blush colors as well as the highlighter. Maybe you would feel more comfortable applying highlighter with this brush as opposed to the C01. C01 has that flat side, which you can tap onto the cheekbones, which I like. But again, you have the classic tapered shape that has this slant here at the top, and you can just whip any type of highlighter here on the cheekbones. I would argue, like I did with the bronzer, I think best with powder highlighters. However, depending on the formula, maybe Gray Squirrel can have a pass with gel to powder formulas. I think because if you don't like a lot of highlighter in the first place, this is from the Burberry Face palette, maybe more advantageous to use Gray Squirrel with a gel to powder highlighter and not necessarily blush or bronzer, because it's going to give you a barely there serving of highlight, but not in your face. So you could experiment with those two. I like Gray Squirrel with gel to powder highlighters because it leaves behind more of a luminous finish instead of shiny metallic, and it just helps the texture of the powder melt into the skin and buff down in a way that again looks smooth and soft focus and not overly glittery or shiny. And as I had probably showed before, HC01, fantastic for the under eye powdering. Because of the tip here, it just beautifully glides alongside the lower lash line, not disrupting the eyes. It doesn't feel stabby or stingy. If you are particularly sensitive to brushes, Gray Squirrel will hold you down. Next up, we have the Highlight 01, much smaller than the HC01 as you see. And I think this is prime for those who only want a very light dosing of under eye powder, the type that you just tap under the eyes. Okay, we're not baking, we're not overloading. All right, this is for the makeup wearer who primarily just applies powder right here, right here. And because of the arrowhead shape, flat on both sides, beautifully soft, the tip just trails here along the lower lash line. You could keep it here right on the inner corner or take it alongside the entire length of your lash line, down the bridge of your nose. So if you wanted a light dosing of bronzer, not necessarily contour, then you can take this brush, powder on the tip, and gently glide the bronzer here down the bridge of the nose. And because of Gray Squirrel's softness, it's not going to pick up a ton of product. It will place just enough for that soft sculpt effect. Other areas here under your lip, if you want it, you could take it here down the jawline. My gosh, so many possibilities. If you had one of those days where you wanted to apply blush through your lids, this is a pretty good brush for that purpose. I would say maybe determined by your eye shape. If you have smaller eyes, maybe this brush will be too big. If you're around my eye size or larger, great just to whip a quick color through the crease. Again, it's not so much for like that clean cut application, but more of like that whipped out blurred effect in your crease if you wanted to just apply a larger dose of color through the eyes. And up next we have the ES01 Eyeshadow 1 Flat Shader. This is a pretty big shader, and here I went in with the Suqqu Signature Eye Color Palette, again from their Autumn Winter Collection 117, their limited release. This brush beautifully placed the color across my lid, and as I had mentioned in my shader brush video, the reason why I love big fluffy shaders is that they are multitasking in nature. You can use this brush to place the standout color on your lid, turn it on its side, and then blur the color through the crease. It's also flat enough to place color here under your lash line, but because it's Gray Squirrel, it's not going to pick up so much product that it will look overly hazy under your lash line. This is more just for a lighter dose of color here, but keep in mind, much like what I had mentioned with the cheek brushes, because this is Gray Squirrel, it's not going to have a hardy pickup like another bristle would, right? This is for a more lightweight, sophisticated approach to eyeshadows, more watercolor, washed out in nature. It doesn't have that same indie brand delivery of pigmentation, and either one is not wrong or right. It's just a different technique, a different approach to makeup. But I want to emphasize that because I know we get in our heads about our favorites, how we love to wear our makeup, our favorite types of makeup products. I do think it appropriate to match up the tool with the right type of makeup, because that will yield the best outcome. If you're looking for heavy pigmentation, then you got to use a different type of brush. But if you're one to just adore lightweight serving of eye color, barely there, very light, very natural, then yes, Gray Squirrel will be your pick. But if you wanted a more traditional blender, here we have the B01 blender brush, and oh my goodness, this perhaps, well, I have a couple that are very soft, but what makes this Gray Squirrel blender unique is that it is well packed with bristles, but still has a beautiful fluidity to the skin. So I applied the matte shadow from the 117 quad across my crease. My gosh, the minute this brush came in contact with my crease, it was just like magic. This is a wizard. This is a magic wand blender brush. I've never felt it so effortless to blend a color through my crease. And I had to use Suqqu shadows because I only thought it appropriate, okay? I mean, one of the best matchups ever, just using Suqqu with Fude. Forget it. This air-light texture across the crease is so, again, I've run out of words. And don't fear the size. If you have a smaller eye type with hooded lids, this brush is beautifully silky. It'll just fit in whatever crevice you present it and will blend the color fine. It will do it for you. Don't worry about your eye shape. In fact, I would consider this brush, even if I had smaller eyes, to finish your eyeshadow on the high edges of your blend, especially if it traveled close to your brow and you just wanted a cleaner blend here on the edges. This is a great finishing brush. Forget it, especially if you have trouble kind of keeping the color under control, if it left your crease, if it traveled too high. This is going to blend it down, refine those edges, and make them look smoother. And the last brush we have is the Eyeshadow 02 round compared to the ES01. We're looking at a pointed, more pencil-like brush in effect. I would say maybe big for precision work, but as I had demonstrated here again with the same Suqqu quad, I applied the sage color on the inner corner, and the tip made it possible for me to nudge that color well into my tear duct. Now, yes, because I love to apply color on the lower inner lash line, it wasn't as precise, but because the shadow I use is more of like an overlay type of texture, I didn't need it to be that precise. But I understand if the way you prefer to apply eyeshadow, you like more precise coloring here on that region, then sure, you might have to reach for a smaller brush. But I thought for this eye look specifically, totally fine to use this size brush. Great for the lower lash line if you wanted something more precise than the ES01. Then the ES02 will then place shadow lower lash line here without it traveling too far. If you needed a smaller brush than the B01, this will be great for smaller eyes to fit color perfectly here through the crease, a little more precise like in nature. And remember, it's not too short, bristled, and dense that you can't blend, right? You can place the color here through the crease first and then take it around in this circular fashion to finish the application, right? That could be your approach instead of you having to grab the B01. The ES02 very well can blend your shadow, right? It's smaller, you might have to change your technique. What I had also mentioned in my Holy Grails video that I especially love this type of brush for is outer corner intensity shadow placement, right? If you don't feel comfortable with the smoky eye approach, if every time you see a dark eyeshadow you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta stay away or else I'll mess it up. If you carefully place a deeper color here on your outer lid, the softness of the gray squirrel will just blur that application. You don't have to swirl and twirl. You don't need any fancy blending techniques. Just rely on the bristle itself. Tap the shadow here on the outer lid as much as you like. You can even strike it in to finish the blend, curve it around the outer quarter of your lower lash line, and you're done. Shall I demonstrate this? Yes, you should. I'll take a deeper color here and I'll just tap it right on the outer lid. You don't have to do anything crazy, right? Like I said, don't worry about any type of swirling, twirling. Rely on the softness of the gray squirrel. Just take it here on the outer part of your lid. Tap it as much as you need so you get from the base of your lash line to the base of the crease. Fit it into the shape you wish to have it in. If you want a little more completion, you can take that same color again on the outer quarter of your lower lash line. If you wanted to swirl and twirl, you can still do that with this brush. It's soft enough for you to still take circular motions here on the edges of that blend, and there you go. You're done. And that is the entire 8-piece set of the Grand Bisyodo series. These come in both the 8-piece set and a 5-piece set. Each one comes with its own brush roll, towel, and brush cleaner. So you can take a look at the website, see what the 5 set comes in. I could tell you right now, actually, we got the F01, C01, H01, ES01, and 2. So this is what the 5 set looks like. I think a pretty complete set set if you ask me. You have the face powder for all over loose pressed powder setting or even bronzer. You have the C01 for more precise cheek product application. You have the H01 for more precise highlighting here, as well as under eye setting. And then you have the ES01 and 2. You have the larger shader brush for lid and crease blending, as well as lower lash line shadow placement, and the ES02 for more precise tasks that you cannot get from the ES01. So that is it, fam. The Grand Series from Bisyodo. Again, a huge thank you to Fude Beauty and the team, and also for Bisyodo for allowing me to film with their brushes, for entrusting me to share information about this just beautifully crafted set that I think worth speaking about, demoing, all the things. Let me know if you had your eye on this set already, if you've already made a purchase before you saw this video, if perhaps you're thinking about it, if you'll pass, what your favorites are down below. I'll see you down in those comments, fam, and until then, that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video will help. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or maybe consider subscribing to my channel. And until then, I will see you on here again with another review tutorial, Fude Extravaganza, or monthly faves. Take care, and I will see you again soon.